An airport during rush hour is a chaotic symphony. Overlapping announcements blared from loudspeakers, suitcase wheels scraped against tiled floors, and tides of passengers surged like an endless wave. But in that very moment, when a sharp crack rang out, everything seemed to freeze. A white ivory cane hit the ground, rolling across the polished stone floor. An elderly woman's hand trembled as she instinctively raised it, shielding herself from an unseen force that had just struck. Standing opposite her, unflinching and cold-eyed, was none other than Lauren Grady, the chief flight attendant of International Flight HL726. Her face was sharp, her tone sharper. "I told you to step back," Lauren said, her voice slicing through the air like a blade. "First class isn't meant for people like you." The boarding gate area plunged into an eerie silence. People stopped mid-step, mid-sentence. Only their eyes moved, fixed on the woman now standing alone. Her silver hair was tied neatly, a sea-green silk scarf draped elegantly over her shoulder, and an unsettling calmness cloaked her figure. She didn't react. No protest, no frown. She bent down, picked up the cane with her thin but steady hand, and when she straightened, her eyes locked onto Lauren's, not with anger, not with pain, but with a quiet depth that made the younger woman instinctively step back. Her voice was low and steady, like a hammer tapping on a glass wall of arrogance. "You've just made the biggest mistake of your career." No one knew who she was, not Lauren, not the onlookers. No one guessed that the woman standing there wasn't just another passenger. She was Vivian Hale, founder, CEO, and chairwoman of the entire Hale Lux aviation empire, the very airline Lauren was working for. And in just a few minutes, what had happened at that gate would become a living verdict, not only for Lauren, but for a culture of silent elitism that had lived too long in luxury air service. Just minutes earlier, Lauren Grady had been the queen of first class, undisputed power in the skies, with a practiced smile and a voice trained to command. Now she stood frozen, still clutching the boarding pass of the very woman she had just humiliated. A young passenger quietly raised their phone, recording everything. No one laughed, no one clapped, but everyone watched, and in those stares, something was waking up. Vivian Hale said nothing. She simply walked, slow, deliberate, toward a window seat, as if no one in the room mattered enough to stop her. A younger flight attendant named Sophie approached Lauren and whispered, Do you know who she is?" Lauren didn't answer. A strange tightness had formed in her chest. Not fear of losing her job, but the gut-deep realization that she had just stepped on something she didn't understand. At that moment, the boarding doors slid open. A middle-aged man in a light gray suit walked in. The name tag on his lanyard read, Richard Montgomery, Executive Director, Hale Lux. He didn't greet anyone, didn't ask questions. He simply tilted his head toward Vivian and said, "Apologies for the delay, Mrs. Hale. The crew is ready to welcome you aboard. This flight is yours." The words, "Mrs. Ford, Hale," landed like a grenade in the already tense room. Lauren's face went pale. Sophie covered her mouth, and the crowd, who thought they'd just witnessed a minor passenger dispute, now realized they had just seen a CEO be insulted by one of her own employees. Vivian didn't say a word. She turned once more and looked directly at Lauren. No raised brows, no biting words, just a gaze, as if she had anticipated this moment and was merely waiting to see what Lauren would do next. Lauren took a step back, her footing unsure, as if the floor beneath her was shifting. Richard didn't need a prompt. He turned to Sophie. "Escort Miss Grady out of this area. She will not be flying today." Effective immediately, she's suspended from duty. Lauren's mouth fell open. I didn't know she was the CEO." Richard's voice cut through her excuses. "That's not the problem. The problem is how you treated someone you thought didn't deserve respect, and that's why you're leaving." Lauren didn't fight back. She couldn't. Sophie gently placed her hand on Lauren's elbow and guided her away. The crowd silently parted to let them through. No words, no objections, but in that silence was a sentence Lauren would carry for the rest of her life. Vivian Hale took her seat by the window in the VIP section. She pulled a leather-bound book from her handbag and quietly opened it. She didn't need to give orders. She only needed to exist. And in that very existence, an entire system began to unravel. The aircraft rolled toward the main runway, its engines humming like a warning for what was coming. But inside first class, no one spoke. Not because they feared flying, but because they had just witnessed how quickly the world as they knew it could be turned upside down. Vivian Hale sat motionless in seat 1A, the soft window light catching the sharp angles of her face. Sophie, the young attendant, approached and gently set a glass on her table. "Here you are, ma'am, Icelandic spring water as requested." Vivian looked at her, a single nod, no compliments, none needed. Because Sophie understood, the mere presence of Vivian Hale had shifted the atmosphere of the entire cabin. At the far end of the terminal, Lauren Grady still hadn't left the airport. She stood behind the glass, watching the plane begin its takeoff. Her hand trembled, not from fear of being fired, but because for the first time in her life, she realized she had been living far too long in a world where appearance dictated worth. Back in the cabin, a man in seat 2C leaned slightly toward Vivian. His name was Marcus Langston, one of the airline's major investors. "Excuse me, are you Vivian Hale, chairwoman of Hale Lux Group?" Vivian lowered her book and turned to him. "Yes, but today I'm just a passenger who was nearly denied boarding because I didn't look the part for first class." Marcus swallowed hard. He had sat through dozens of board meetings, heard her name spoken like legend. But now, seeing her in person, he understood why they called her the Silent Queen. "I'm truly sorry that happened," Marcus said softly. Vivian didn't respond right away. Instead, she asked, "Tell me, how many people like me have been treated this way? People without a name, without power, with no one there to record it?" Marcus fell silent. That wasn't a question for him. It was a question for the entire system. As the plane reached cruising altitude, a new voice echoed from the flight deck. "We'd like to extend a special welcome to Mrs. Vivian Hale, founder and chairwoman of Hale Lux Airlines, joining us on today's flight. It is our profound honor." The cabin shuddered. Heads turned. The glances that had earlier skimmed past her with confusion now shifted to shame. Some bowed their heads, others quietly adjusted their ties. No one felt right anymore. Sophie approached again and whispered, "Is there anything else I can bring you, Mrs. Hale?" Vivian shook her head. "Nothing more. But from this moment on, I want you to start recording the names of every passenger who witnessed what happened this morning, along with their behavior." Sophie's eyes widened. "I'm sorry?" Vivian didn't smile, didn't threaten. She simply said gently, "We'll need them for the cultural reform initiative I'm about to announce. I want to know who stood up, who stayed silent, and who turned away." Sophie nodded. She couldn't tell if she was trembling from fear or admiration. Vivian leaned back in her seat, the book reopened in her lap. But this time, she wasn't reading. She was thinking about something that would change the entire aviation industry the moment this plane landed. After 3 hours of smooth flight, the aircraft began its descent. But the atmosphere in first class was anything but calm. Every passing minute felt heavier. Everyone was waiting to see what Vivian Hale would do next. Marcus Langston leaned forward again. "If I may, I'd like to formally invite you to a closed-door shareholder summit. I believe Hale Lux needs to hear your voice." Vivian turned, her eyes unreadable. "After what happened this morning, you think I still need permission to speak?" Marcus froze. I'm sorry." Vivian gave a slight nod. There was no anger, no raised voice. But everyone knew, when she was silent, she was more powerful than any outburst. As the plane touched down, the usual announcement came from the crew. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Redwood International Airport. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened until the seatbelt sign is off." But the voice was quickly drowned out by an urgent internal call from the forward galley. Sophie rushed over to Vivian, face tense. "Mrs. Hale, Mr. Richard Monroe, the current CEO, is waiting for you at the jet bridge." He didn't know what happened, but it seems he's seen the video. Vivian set her glass down. Her gaze turned ice cold. She looked at Sophie and said calmly, "He's waiting for me? Good. But he won't be meeting me. He'll be meeting the press release I'm about to publish." The aircraft door opened. A line of sharply dressed executives stood waiting, but none dared to step into the cabin. In the center stood Richard Monroe, holding an iPad, eyes glued to the video now going viral across social media. Lauren Grady slapping the hand of an elderly woman. And then, the face of Vivian Hale appeared on screen. A nearby assistant leaned in and whispered, "Over 4 million views in 2 hours. The hashtag #WrongWoman is trending #1 on Twitter." Richard looked up, just in time to see Vivian step out. She walked straight ahead, unbothered, unstoppable. "Vivian, we need to talk." She paused, turned her head slowly. "We will talk, but it will be in front of the board, tomorrow, in person." I'm sorry for what happened." Vivian's voice was calm, controlled. "I'm not the one who needs the apology, Richard. It's the passengers. The nameless employees who are harmed every day, and everyone who's ever been excluded from first class because they didn't look like someone who belonged there." Richard fell silent. Vivian continued, her voice like stone, "And tell legal to prepare. I'm invoking Clause 7.2 of the shareholder agreement, full executive control in the event of a cultural crisis." No one spoke. She walked past them with the grace of someone leaving an outdated era behind. Inside the VIP lounge, in a quiet private suite, Vivian opened her laptop. A new email was sent with the subject line, "Emergency Reform Proposal, the Dignitas Plan." Attached was a 47-page document, including a personnel list marked for reassignment review, the official termination of Lauren Grady, a new training framework titled "Values Are Not Negotiable," and a final clause, a zero-tolerance policy for any form of bias, based on age, appearance, race, gender, or physical expression, across all service levels. Below her signature was a quote by Eleanor Roosevelt, "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent." But today, Vivian didn't need to quote history. She was writing it. The next morning, 9 a.m. sharp, floor 48 of the Hilux Air headquarters was packed. Every board member, all major shareholders, legal teams, media reps, senior HR executives. On the massive screen, a bold headline appeared, "The Dignitas Plan." "This isn't a rebranding, this is an awakening, Vivian Hale." The room fell silent as Vivian entered. No introductions, no preamble. She placed her iPad on the table, pressed play. The first slide, a still frame of Lauren Grady slapping the hand of an elderly passenger, timestamp, date number, viral hashtags, "Wrong Woman," "First-Class Bias," "Hale Lux Awakens." She turned to the board. "My name is Vivian Hale, and I was publicly struck at the boarding gate by someone who represents the company I built." No one dared exhale. "I don't need an apology. I need transformation. Not because I'm the CEO, but because this could have happened to anyone who doesn't look like who they think should belong." A PR director began to speak, but Vivian clicked to the next slide. Internal data. Discrimination complaints up to 207% in 18 months. Lauren Grady wasn't the cause. She was the symptom, and the system we've allowed to flourish, that's the disease. Then she played the second video. Internal security footage. It showed staff doing nothing, staring, turning away, pretending to be busy. "I didn't build this airline to preserve a culture of silence in the face of wrong. We don't need more cameras, we need more courage." A senior shareholder spoke quietly. "Then what do you propose?" Vivian replied with just 3 words. "Replace them." Oh. Every executive responsible for internal culture, the head of training, senior HR, regional managers, were to be replaced or suspended pending independent investigation. The Dignitas Plan included 1. Retraining 100% of flight crews, led not by corporate trainers but by actual victims of discrimination. No PowerPoints, only lived experience. 2. Establishing a transparent reporting system where any employee or passenger could report misconduct without fear of retaliation. 3. The no judgments by appearance rule. No employee was allowed to alter service based on how someone looked, clothing, race, age, body, or otherwise. When she finished, no one moved. No one blinked. Vivian said one last thing before leaving the room. "I was struck, not because I was weak, but because this system assumed I didn't matter. But from this moment forward, anyone who is made to feel small at Hale Lux will know they are not alone." 2 days later, the entire aviation industry was shaken as CNN aired the headline, "Hale Lux launches the largest anti-bias overhaul in aviation history." Vivian declined all interview requests, but she was seen sitting at a small cafe near the airport, dressed in a simple knit sweater, quietly reading a book as if nothing had happened. Only this time, no one dared ask her to move seats, because now everyone knew who she was, and more importantly, she had reminded the world who we are. The boardroom stood empty. The black leather chairs had been neatly aligned. Afternoon sunlight poured across the whiteboard where Vivian once stood. Downstairs, in a smaller office, Lauren Grady, the woman who once believed she was an irreplaceable pillar of first-class service, sat with her hands tightly clasped on her lap. No uniform. No authority. Just a woman lost in the reflection of herself, unable to recognize who she had become. Across from her sat a stranger, an independent investigator, brought in from outside to handle serious violations of corporate culture. "What did you do wrong, Miss Grady?" Lauren took a deep breath. The question sounded simple, but no phrase from her old vocabulary, the one used to deflect and justify, could help her now. "I looked at a person, and didn't see a person," she whispered. "I saw an inconvenience, a problem, something that didn't belong." The investigator didn't respond. He simply wrote a few notes, then closed his file. "You'll be suspended without pay for 60 days. You may be considered for reinstatement only if you complete Halux's special social awareness restoration program. If you refuse, your file will be forwarded to other aviation organizations along with a formal recommendation against hiring." Lauren didn't react. She already knew. She hadn't just lost her job. She had lost the image of herself she once believed was right. Meanwhile, in a small apartment in Chicago, Vivian had returned from the historic board meeting. She removed her shoes, brewed a cup of peppermint tea, and settled into the armchair by the window. When she opened her laptop to check her email, a message from her assistant appeared. A letter arrived at the CEO's office. No return name. "I thought you might want to read it personally." Attached was a photo of a handwritten note. Vivian enlarged the image. "Dear Miss Hale, yesterday I turned 12. I flew Halux Flight 701 with my grandma. We didn't sit in first class, but I was standing behind you when it happened. I saw how you were treated. I saw how you were pushed aside like you didn't deserve to be there. I was really angry because my grandma has been treated like that too. But then I saw you stand tall. You didn't yell. You didn't cry. You just looked that woman in the face and spoke calmly. Just like my grandma does when she protects me from bullies. You don't know this, but after you got on the plane, my grandma turned to me and said, 'Watch closely, Emily. That's how a person keeps their dignity without ever throwing a punch.' Last night, I drew a picture. I drew you standing in the airport with hundreds of people behind you, all with their heads bowed. But you were standing tall. My grandma hung it in the kitchen. She said, 'This is why a girl must learn to stand tall, even when no one gives her permission.' I didn't know you were the CEO, but I think if someone like you runs an airline, maybe the world isn't as scary as I thought. Thank you for not bowing your head. Emily C., age 12, not in first class. But I learned the most important lesson." Vivian sat still. Tears dropped onto her hands as she quietly reread every line. Not out of pain, but because she realized, even when no one claps, someone is always watching. And some revolutions don't begin in courtrooms or on stages, but in a single gaze that stands tall when others step back. 3 weeks after the incident at Gate 12A, the Halux Airlines headquarters in Chicago welcomed a special guest. Not a politician, not an investor, but a 12-year-old girl in a simple cotton dress clutching a carefully laminated drawing. Emily Carter, seat 27B. Vivian Hale personally greeted her in the lobby. She wore a plain white blouse, no fanfare, no pretense. Their handshake was gentle but firm, as if two women across generations had just signed a treaty with their eyes. "You're the one who wrote that letter, aren't you?" Vivian asked. Emily hesitated. "Yes, ma'am. I didn't think you'd actually read it." Vivian smiled. "Not only did I read it, I printed it and pinned it on the boardroom wall." Emily's eyes widened, nearly in disbelief. Vivian extended her hand. "Come. Today I want to show you what you've helped change." A grand hall. On stage, the new logo of Halux Airlines appeared. A pair of wide, open wings. Below it, the words, "Every seat has a story. Every passenger matters." Vivian Hale and Emily Carter walked on stage together. In front of hundreds of employees, from veteran pilots to newly hired attendants, Vivian raised her hand to introduce. "This is Emily Carter. She didn't sit in first class. She didn't have a VIP card, no privileges. But Emily wrote me a letter, not to demand justice, but to remind me that justice doesn't always come from a title. It comes from courage." The auditorium fell silent. Emily looked overwhelmed. But Vivian leaned down and whispered, "You can do this. I'm right here." Emily took a breath. "I didn't know what happened that day was such a big deal. I just saw someone being pushed away, and someone who stood tall. And I thought, if grown-ups can stand tall when they're disrespected, then maybe kids can learn that too." I didn't have any power, but I had eyes, and I saw someone who deserved respect. A wave of applause erupted, not the polite kind, but the kind that comes when people realize sometimes the most powerful lesson doesn't come from a training manual, it comes from a 12-year-old in seat 27B. After the event, Vivian brought Emily into a private room. On the table was a small silver box. She gently slid it across to Emily. "I can't give you money, but I'd like to give you this." Emily opened the box. Inside was a metal boarding pass, engraved with her name. Emily Carter, seat 1A, lifetime boarding pass, for speaking up when no one did. Vivian smiled. "No one can buy this ticket. It has no market value, but it means everything to me." Emily looked down at the pass, then up at the woman before her. "I don't know what I've done to deserve this." Vivian shook her head gently. "You already did it. You saw something wrong, and you didn't let it stay buried in silence." Final scene. Emily sat in first class, beside the window. The sky outside blazed in sunlight. She opened a small notebook and wrote, "My first day on a flight that made grown-ups think again. I might just be an ordinary passenger, but I know I can change something, just by daring to speak." 3 months after the incident at Gate 12A, the Grand Summit Hotel, host of the International Aviation Conference, glowed with light. On the main stage, dozens of CEOs, executives, investors, and policy experts from over 50 global airlines gathered. One name was called. "Please welcome to the stage, Chairwoman of Hale Lux Airlines, Ms. Vivian Hale." Vivian stepped forward in a slate gray suit. No badges, no medals. She didn't carry a speech, only a wooden cane in her hand, an exact replica of the one dropped by Meredith Winslow, the woman publicly slapped in front of dozens. The room fell still. Vivian began. 3 months ago, an employee from the airline I lead struck an elderly passenger because she didn't look like someone who belonged in first class. I'm not here to apologize for her. I'm here to apologize for the entire system that allowed it to happen without anyone thinking it was wrong. Because if that day, the woman who was slapped had not been me, if she were just an ordinary grandmother, without power, without status, would any of you believe she'd receive justice? Translators whispered through headsets. All eyes lifted. Vivian raised the cane. "This is our new symbol. Not to threaten, but to remind us, for every cane dropped because someone was humiliated, we must raise a new principle in its place." Which is why today I officially announce the First Look Initiative. Behind her, the screen lit up. A global training system for all flight and ground staff to identify and dismantle unconscious bias. An AI platform to monitor staff-passenger interactions, ensuring behavior-based service, not appearance-based. A transparent complaint system, giving every passenger, regardless of class or status, access to their case resolution. Vivian looked straight at the front row, where the world's most powerful CEOs sat. "I don't expect you to agree with me today. I only hope that next time someone is dismissed, insulted, or removed because they don't look like a first-class passenger, you won't look away." That slap wasn't just for one woman. It was a slap to the arrogance of an entire industry. And I believe it's time we stop staying silent. As delegates departed, a camera caught a quiet moment. An older man wearing a light jacket stopped before Vivian. He bowed his head, said nothing, then handed her an old, folded boarding pass. Vivian recognized it, seat 37E, from his own airline. Behind him, the logo of a competitor. But his eyes said everything. "I want to start again. From here," he said softly. Vivian placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then let's take off again, together." This story didn't begin with a speech. It began with a dismissive glance. A cane dropped, a hand raised, a choice to stand up, even when no one clapped. And the final question isn't, how much power do you hold? It's, what will you do when someone is treated as less because they don't fit your definition of belonging? Have you ever been judged for how you look, your age, or your skin? Share your story below. If this story moved you, share it. Someone in your circle might need a reminder. Respect isn't a privilege granted by status. It's a right we're all born with. Subscribe for more stories like this, where every story is a wake-up call.